Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us for this next session of Ask Nate Anything, a chance to get a lot of questions about Open EDX answered. I'm Louis Gadima. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Appsembler, and Nate Aune is the CEO and founder of Appsembler. I want to give you just a little background on just a few things, and then I'll turn it over to Nate and start asking the questions. You do have the opportunity to download a few handouts that we've attached to this session. So those are some additional background on Open EDX and some case studies of ways in which it's being used and work that Appsembler has done. So I invite you to do that. There's a one-question survey at the end today. So I ask you to take 5 seconds and answer that. And then we expect to make this more of a monthly style activity, having these webinars regularly. And our next one will be a much deeper dive into Xblocks, which a lot of people had questions on for today. And we have that tentatively scheduled for March 8th. So you'll get more information on that very shortly. So Nate Aune is the CEO and founder of Appsembler, as I mentioned. He's been working in the open source community with open source software for about 20 years. Was working on the edX team as a consultant about 2.5 years ago when Open EDX was being prepared for release. And so he has about as much experience as anyone in the world working on edX and Open EDX. So Nate, the people who are participating today, who are joining us, have a real wide range of backgrounds. So some of you have been working with that edX, Open EDX for a year or two, have deep technical skills. Others are really brand new to it. So for those who have deeper experience, I'm going to ask you to just indulge this first question. While Nate, if you could explain a little bit about what is Open EDX and how is it different from edX.org?
Sure. Yeah, before I answer that, I just want to thank everyone for joining today. It was really exciting to see so many people from both existing customers as well as a lot of new folks joining us today. So I want to thank you all for taking the time. So Open EDX is an open source online learning platform that you can use to author and deliver online courses. It's used by companies and organizations all over the world to host massive open online courses, or MOOCs, as well as smaller classes and training modules. And it's been adopted by many top universities, but we're finding increasingly it's being used for corporate learning, so companies like Johnson & Johnson, Salesforce, McKinsey, HP, Microsoft, Financial Times, and many other organizations all around the world.
Great. And how is it different from edX.org?
So edX is a nonprofit organization that was founded by Harvard and MIT, and dozens of other institutions also participate. And edX.org is the destination site which offers courses from top universities all around the world. And Open EDX is the software that powers edX.org, and edX.org has over 5 million registered students from every country in the world. And a few years ago, edX decided to open source the code so that other organizations can stand up their own instances of Open EDX, and also so that educators can extend the platform to build tools that meet their specific needs. And one thing that we've noticed is that by open sourcing the software, the Open EDX community is growing rapidly, the platform is evolving rapidly, and there's improvements and contributions coming in from big companies, small companies, universities, kind of all over the map.
All right. So I want to just mention to people on your GoToWebinar dashboard, there is a questions section. So if people have follow-up questions or additional questions that we aren't asking, if you want to put those into that section, into that panel there, I'll take a look at those and see if we can squeeze those in. We did have a lot of great questions asked in advance, but we'll see if we can use some of those too. So Nate, one of the platforms that edX is often compared to is another open source online learning platform, Moodle. So what are some of the differences that you see between Open edX and Moodle?
Yeah, well, first of all, the similarities. So Moodle is also open source. It's been around for a number of years, longer than edX has, and it's gotten quite popular. I guess one of the big differences is that Open edX is built to scale in a way that Moodle isn't. So, you know, Moodle was really kind of designed in the early days to be, envisioned purely for schools in the outback of Australia. So the teacher in one location and the kids are on farms. And the core group of developers who built the Moodle platform have a vision of the software which is purely academic. So you can think of Moodle more of as a VLE, a virtual learning environment, not really an LMS. Also being older, kind of a different vintage, our customers who use Moodle have described the UI as kind of funky, great if it's a 2006 UI, whereas Open edX has a really wonderful modern UI that's easy on the eyes, it's more intuitive to use, people pick it up really quickly. So going back to the API issue, because there's no core Moodle API, this means that the reporting module doesn't talk with the classroom management module, and it's only going to report on the standard courses. So this means that it gets very messy if you're trying to use Moodle in a corporate context. Open edX, on the other hand, comes from MIT, has very strong, which has very strong engineering skills. So that gives the platform some authority. It also helps that edX.org is currently serving over 5 million students. So it's clearly like a platform that has demonstrated that it can scale. Stanford was building their own MOOC platform, and then they decided to drop it and adopt Open edX instead. And I think that speaks to the quality of the platform if Stanford is investing in it.
Yeah, that's something I hear a lot when people approach us who have been using Moodle or comparing Moodle. One of the big differences that they often cite is on ease of use and how modern the interface seems. So one of the major components of edX, Open edX, and something that I think people don't appreciate enough is Xblocks. And so maybe you could talk about Xblocks for a few minutes and the kind of flexibility and capabilities that brings to the Open edX platform.
Yes, we've been really surprised when talking to prospective customers how many of them have never heard of Xblocks. So we just published a blog post about Xblocks that we can refer to people when they ask this question. So what are Xblocks? Well, similar to how WordPress has plugins and Drupal has add-ons, Open edX has Xblocks, which are essentially courseware components. So these are the blocks of content that make up your course. And these blocks can be anything. They can be static text, they can be videos, they can be problem sets, they can even be widgets that the student can interact with. So really there's no constraints on what can go inside an Xblock. And you can think of Xblocks as a way of extending the Open edX platform with new capabilities, with some standard rules about how the block can send data back and forth to Open edX, such as who's the student, how many attempts did they make, what was their score for this exercise, etc. So there's been both contributions from the edX team as well as contributions from all over universities and companies have authored Xblocks and made them publicly available, open source. So some of the ones that I want to highlight, there's a whole range of them, and we can follow up after this webinar with directories of where you can get a list of these different Xblocks. But some of the ones that I want to highlight are the staff graded assignment, which my team of developers built this for MIT, which essentially lets you upload an assignment. It could be a Word doc, it could be audio file, a video, really any file that sits on your computer. You can upload it into edX, and then the instructor can then download that file, give it a grade, upload it back into the system, and add some notes and some comments. So that's a really useful feature for any anyone who wants to basically have assets that live on their computer that they're submitting as an assignment. There's also been a lot of interesting integrations with other third-party tools. So Google built the Google Drive and Google Calendar integration, so you can basically embed a Google document right in your edX course. You can embed a calendar. When you update the calendar or you update the document in Google, it instantly gets updated in your edX course. Microsoft has also contributed something called the Microsoft Office Mix, which is kind of an interactive presentation Xblock that's really cool. And then there's been all kinds of other interesting, more experimental things like adaptive learning Xblocks, where you can have conditions. Depending on how a learner answered a poll question, you can send them to a different problem. You can also have problems with adaptive hints. So if they answer the question wrong, you can give them a hint, and it sort of is learning how the student is progressing through the materials. So just to summarize, there's a whole range of different Xblocks that are out there that are available today. But the beauty of the Xblocks architecture is that it's extensible, and it means that if edX doesn't do something that you want it to do, it's very easy to create one of these components and plug it into your site to make it do that.
Yeah, I know a couple that people ask me about are things like drag and drop and Flash support, and those are both Xblocks. What about HTML5? That's another way to extend the platform or make it the courses more interactive too, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's this new standard emerging called H5P. You can find more about it at h5p.org. And these are essentially pure JavaScript widgets that are very lightweight, and you can drop them into any CMS or LMS. And they provide sort of like an interactive, polls or drag and drop or interactive widgets to really bring your course to life and add a lot more dynamic elements besides just the kind of boring multiple choice and text input. So I encourage anyone who's interested in that to go to h5p.org and read more about that new emerging way of adding new dynamic components to your site.
And as you mentioned, we do have a new blog post about Xblocks. So if you go to the Appsembler blog, you'll find the links to a couple different lists of Xblocks. And there's dozens of them out there. And if there's something that isn't there, it can be developed. So there's a new release of Open EDX coming out, maybe today. It may have been released in the last hour. I don't know. But it's imminent, named Dogwood. So could you tell us a little bit about what's in Dogwood?
Yeah, so this release is not going to have as many new features as previous releases because a lot of the efforts were more around getting Dogwood to work with the latest version of Django, because the version of Django that edX was using was going to be deprecated. So thankfully they've got all that working, and now edX is on a modern version of Django. But there have been some new features. One of the most interesting ones, I think, is the addition of a new e-commerce engine, which is codenamed Otto. And what this will allow you to do is create courses for a fee. And the e-commerce engine that edX is using is a full-featured e-commerce platform. So it has coupon codes and discounts and bundling and upsells and discount. It has all the kinds of things that you would expect in an e-commerce system like Shopify or BigCommerce. So this is going to open up a whole new set of possibilities for how you can sell content, either sell subscriptions or sell courses on a per individual basis, or sell a bundle of courses, or sell a time-limited a subscription like a 3-month subscription or a year subscription. So we're still in the very early days, but the good news is that has now been successfully integrated with edX, and so the foundation is there to build on top of and create all kinds of really interesting pricing models around online course content. Trying to think of what other interesting features. I think that's probably the main thing I would say. There's a Dogwood release notes page that we can send out that has a list of all the features that are going to be with Dogwood.
So one question that came in was someone asked, is the Dogwood release OpenStack compatible?
Yeah, there's been a number of groups that have been working on OpenStack support for Open EDX. So for those of you who don't know, OpenStack is basically an open source alternative to Amazon Web Services. So they basically looked at Amazon Web Services and said, this is some great technology, but it's not open, it's proprietary. Only Amazon has the ability to do this. So a bunch of bigger tech companies got together and said, let's build a new standard way of deploying applications at scale, not just to cloud providers like Amazon, but even bare metal if you wanted to set up your own server. So OpenStack is a way of doing that, and there's a number of groups that are working to make Open EDX compatible such that you can deploy Open EDX onto an OpenStatic deployment. Hesteco, I think is how you say their name. They just have published all their scripts for how to do that. And I know that Xavier from OpenCraft has also been doing some work with OpenStack. So if people are interested in that, we can also send some more information of where you can find those things.
Okay. And there's some enhanced Open EDX mobile apps being released right around now or have been released. What's going on with the mobile apps?
Yeah, so edX has two mobile apps that they've open sourced, an iPhone or iOS app and an Android app. Those are both publicly available on GitHub. And we've taken the iOS app and we built our own Appsembler branded iPhone app. And we're about to release our first branded iOS app for a customer. And the first version of that app was basically a glorified video player, which let you download the videos for offline viewing. And the most recent version of the app expands the functionality so that you can now do assessments right within the app. You can view courses announcements, you can download handouts. You still can't participate in discussions, but that's coming. The newer version of the apps depend on Dogwood because it uses newer APIs that weren't available in Cypress. So once Dogwood comes out, then you can take those mobile apps and take advantage of the new APIs that edX provides. And there is a roadmap on open.edx.org where you can see all the features that are being built for the mobile apps. And there's also a documentation in the edX Learner's Guide which kind of explains what you can do with the mobile app. So those are also a couple links to students that we can send out after the call.
All right, great. So let's talk about something else. What about integrating Open EDX with other systems? Can Open EDX be integrated with Salesforce or other programs or systems?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we're hearing more and more often from companies and universities who have existing systems in place, and they see Open EDX as sort of augmenting what they already have. They don't want Open EDX to replace their existing directory of users, for example. They already have a database of all their customers or partners that lives in Salesforce. They don't want to have to replicate all that data inside edX. So we've integrated Open EDX with Salesforce for one customer, and we're working with another customer on a more advanced integration. So for the first customer, they wanted to verify that a person registering on the Open EDX site was either a customer, a partner, or an employee. So what we did is we built some glue code that synchronizes the tables in Salesforce with Open EDX and checks the user when they register and assign them an appropriate role. And then this role then affects what courses that user can see within Open EDX. For the second customer, they want to use Salesforce as a way to track which students are enrolled in which courses and use Salesforce's robust reporting capabilities to generate reports on student enrollment and completion. And really the beauty of Open EDX is that because it's open source, it can be integrated with literally anything. And of course the Salesforce APIs are really good, so that makes things easier.
What about integration with live virtual classrooms? This is something that comes up a fair amount. People want to have a video streaming of a live virtual classroom?
Yeah, we've had many inquiries about adding a video conferencing component to the courses, which would, in essence, create a virtual classroom in which students and instructors could interact in real time. So the typical use case for this would be like lectures, study groups, office hours. So we're currently working with the creators of Big Blue Button, which is a popular open source video conferencing solution, to integrate Big Blue Button with Open EDX. And we've already conducted a proof of concept, which went really well. So we're now piloting it with a customer, and if that goes well, we'll make it generally available to customers. And the way that the integration works is Big Blue Button makes use of Open EDX's LTI support to seamlessly drop the student and the instructor into the Big Blue Button environment without the student or instructor having to register and log in separately. So they just click a button and they're instantly brought into that live real-time environment.
Okay, so something I should have probably asked back when we were talking about mobile apps, but the question of responsiveness. Responsive being applications that adjust themselves to fit whatever device they're being looked at, desktop, tablet, smartphone. So Open EDX isn't yet fully responsive. How's that coming along?
Yeah, so the edX platform is not currently responsive, but the edX user experience team has been working on something they call the UI toolkit. It's called the UX pattern library, which is a UI toolkit. And that consists of a common set of styles and controls, as well as structural elements when you're developing the application pages or screens. And the structural component of this UX pattern library will include responsive elements, which can then be leveraged in pages throughout Open EDX. And so Brian Talbot, who's the UX guy at edX, he says that this will be, it is released and consumable in its current state, but it hasn't yet been integrated into the edX platform code, and so it's not actually available right now in Studio or the LMS. So in the meantime, here at Appsembler, we've built our own theme for Open EDX that we use on every customer site, and this theme is fully responsive at the top level pages. So this is like the home page, the login registration page, the course listing, the dashboard, but not yet the courseware pages. Those are a lot more work, and we're sort of waiting for edX to complete the integration of their UX pattern library with the edX platform, and then all of those elements will then inherently be responsive.
Okay. So about, I do just want to remind people, if you do have some other questions, there is that question panel on the GoToWebinar interface, so feel free to ask some other questions if what you're interested in isn't being discussed. Some questions about integrating third-party content. One person asked about integrating content from Articulate Storyline. Someone else asked about OLX. So maybe you could talk about ways in which third-party content can be brought into Open EDX and ways in which content can be moved or integrated with other learning management systems.
Yeah, so first maybe we should define what OLX is for those on the call who don't know about it. So OLX stands for Open Learning XML, and it's the XML-based standard that's used to build courses for the edX platform. And the beauty of OLX is that it's just plain text XML. So you can export an Open edX course as a zip file or tarball. You can open it up in any text editor, and you can see all of your content. This also means that it's very easy to migrate content from one system and import it into Open EDX. So MIT has already developed a Moodle to edX importer, and one of our customers is currently moving courses from a proprietary Drupal-based LMS into Open EDX by dumping out the data from Drupal, and then they massage it so that it fits the OLX standard. And then that output is basically just importable as if it were an Open EDX course. So going back to the question, MIT keeps all of their courses as OLX in the OLX format in GitHub repos, so they can version control them. And they've also developed something called LORE, which stands for Learning Object Resource Entity, I think. I don't remember what the E stands for, environment. And LORE is basically a standalone piece of software that lives outside of Open EDX that MIT is using to sort of manage their Open EDX courses in sort of the native XML format. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to reuse the content in multiple courses. So LORE essentially lets them kind of cherry pick different pieces of content to stick in different courses. Going on to the articulate storyline question, articulate storyline, for those of you who don't know, is a desktop piece of software that is commonly used to create e-learning content. So some other tools you may have heard of are like Adobe Captivate or Camtasia, and these types of tools have been used for many years to kind of create a learning module that has some interactivity. If you need those activities to be recorded back into edX, then your only option right now is to use something called SCORM Cloud. And SCORM Cloud lets you upload your SCORM content. So you would export articulate storyline to SCORM. It's the SCORM format, and then you would import that SCORM content into SCORM Cloud, and then you would expose that asset in SCORM Cloud via LTI, and then edX would consume that content via LTI. It's a little bit complicated, but we've written a blog post about it that kind of walks through all the different steps. So it can be done. The other way of doing it is to export it as an HTML5 asset and then upload that to some place like Google Drive or Amazon S3. And I did this as a proof of concept for a customer who had these simulations that they had exported from Captivate, and so I just threw it up on a Google Drive and successfully extended it in the course using the iframe module. So edX has an iframe component, and which allows you to pull in content basically from anywhere on the web. So if that articulate storyline content can live somewhere on the web, it can get pulled into edX. Eventually, we'd like to extend the files and uploads area of edX. You could upload a zip file of assets directly into edX, and then it would unzip them into a directory and serve everything out of there. But that's significantly more work. I'll also mention that we're currently working with a customer to bring native SCORM import support to edX, so stay tuned for that.
Okay. And what about LTI capabilities in edX? We're getting near the end of our session, but maybe we could finish on this and just talk about where Open EDX is with LTI and Tin Can.
Yeah, so LTI is another way of extending edX with content that lives elsewhere, or vice versa. edX can expose its content to another system. So LTI is a standard way of doing that, and until recently, edX could only be a consumer, meaning it could pull content from another system into its courses. But as of a more recent version of edX, you can now make edX a provider, which means that you can author your courses in edX, and then via LTI, you can pull coursework components out into another system. Like maybe you have Moodle, or you have Canvas, or you have some other system internally, and you don't want to have to copy that content. You can use LTI to basically tell edX to be a provider of that content.
All right, great. So thank you, Nate. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are 3 handouts that I think you will find useful. So you're welcome to download those. Please answer our long 1-question survey at the end as you leave. And you'll be getting information about our next webinar, but we expect that it'll be March 8th, and it'll be a deeper dive both on what Xblocks can do, some of the options available to you, and for the more engineering inclined, how they can be developed. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.